Hello YouTube, it's Tatiana Volkt here, and today we're going to be doing a 2020 book wrap-up and review video to go over the 30 books that I ended up reading in 2020. So if you're interested in hearing some quick stats about my reading habits of the year, along with some reviews of the books that I read, definitely stick around and let's get into it. Okay, so for the stat portion of this video, I have my handy dandy planner here, which I do have a video flip through if you're interested in functional planning, but I'll be using this to check my notes for the year and my stats and all of that stuff. So starting off, I only read 30 books this year. I actually, in about July, checked Goodreads to see the status of things and how things were going, and was shocked to see that I had only finished 2 books up until that point. So I decided that I would just give myself a goal of 12 books for the rest of the year, since I had a lot of catching up to do, and I managed to surpass that quite a bit. And most of the books that I read last year were all in December. Okay, so my total page count for 2020 was 9,176. The shortest book that I read was Anything You Want by Derek Sivers, which is a kind of self-helpy type of books, and it was only 90 pages, so pretty quick read, pretty enjoyable. It was about a entrepreneur who built a business by basically making something that he wasn't able to get himself. He just talked about that experience, and I found it interesting and good. The longest book that I ended up reading was actually an audio book, and it was the first book in the Mistborn series, and it was 544 pages long. I believe the book is called The Final Empire. So I ended up enjoying that book. It was the longest one that I read. Next up, the most popular book of the year was Becoming by Michelle Obama, and my least popular book was The Practical Guide for Witches, I believe, which I ended up reading on my Kindle. The average book length of the books that I read was 305 pages, and my average rating was 3.8. I also, in 2020, actually last month, I created a Bookstagram account, and I'm having a lot of fun with that. So if you're interested in book content, I would highly suggest. You can see some examples of my Bookstagram content here, which I'm pretty proud of. In addition to that, I decided that I would try to update my ratings for the year, because originally I was pretty laxed at how many 5 stars I gave out. Any book that I enjoyed basically got a 5-star, and then I thought that that wasn't really accurate, and I wanted to utilize all of the stars a little bit better. So I went back and updated a lot of my ratings a few days ago at the end of December. 1, you didn't like it. 2, it was all right. 3, you enjoyed it. 4, it was great. And 5, it was amazing. So I'm trying to do that. I might have to go back and adjust things, but I had 4 5 stars of the year, 14 4 stars of the year, and 12 3 stars of the year. And I gave 0 2 stars and 0 1 stars. So it was actually a pretty good year for me overall. I did have a few DNFs, so these are the physical books that I did not finish in the year. Some of these I will probably return to, and some of them I probably won't. Those were my DNFs of the year. I also have a pile of books that I read in previous years that I want to reread this year. So I guess I should go into plans for 2021. I'm hoping to read 100 books this year because I kind of need to make up a little bit for last year, and I've been having so much fun reading recently. You're just going to be seeing that more on my channel in the new year because I enjoy reading a lot, and I'm surprised that I didn't read much last year. These are some books that I didn't update the ratings because I just wasn't sure, so I thought it would be fun to go back and reread them to see, do I really like these books? Are they in the right rating? So these are some of the higher rated books on my Goodreads. I do have The Hobbit here, which technically isn't on my Goodreads. It was read long before I used Goodreads, and then everything else is just on my Goodreads that I want to reread. Okay, now I'm sure you probably realize that this stack is not all of my books. Because in addition to the physical books, I did read some on Kindle, and I also listened to audiobooks from my library, so I don't have the physical books for everything that I read. Now, I do have them all written here because there are only 30 of them, so this will be fairly easy. I'm gonna try to do these sort of in order. I don't think they'll actually be in order though, but one of the first books I read of the year was Wicca by Harmony Nice, a fellow YouTuber in the kind of witchy community. I very recently got into witchy stuff and was just wanting to learn more about it. Wicca is a religion, and it is not witchcraft on its own. Witchcraft is not a religion, yada yada yada, but I'm not Wiccan. I'm just interested in learning about it. So this was a book. It was a great read. I originally gave it 5-star, and then when I went to do my rejigging, I put it down to 4 stars because it was a great book, but it's not my favorite. I don't think self-help books are really gonna fall into that category for me. Next up was technically a reread, which I think I actually read twice this year, but I only counted it as once. So if I was being a little bit more accurate, I read 31 books, but they kind of happened back to back because I believe I listened to the audio book again and then got the physical book like a month later and reread it physically. This was another one that was 5-star that I bumped down to 4 stars. It's a good book. I love the concept. It's hard for me to implement, but it's all about kind of organizing and decluttering your mind by getting all of the information out of it on a regular basis and building a system that you trust, which I'm hoping will be this for 2021. Next up, like I said, actually I have 2 books that are around the same time. So I got both of these books in my Once Upon a Book Club book boxes. So this one was the adult one, and this was their temporary middle grade summer one. This one came with 3 books. This was the first one in the series by Elaine Adams. It's called The Blue Witch. I ended up giving this 3 stars in the end. It was okay. I had problems with it. It just wasn't for me for the most part, but it was a decent book as far as I could remember. I admittedly don't remember a lot from it. Hello, it is editing me, and I wanted to apologize for some of the books. I forgot to tell you about what the book premise was, and some of them I remembered. It's a little random, and I apologize. I will do better in the future. Next up, I ended up reading The Last Piece, which I actually have a full-on unboxing and book review on my old channel, which I will link down below if you're interested in hearing a full in-depth review. So it's about a mother with 3 grown-up daughters who goes on a kind of trip that's out of the ordinary, and you're trying to figure out why, and you're trying to figure out what's going on, and there's some family dynamic stuff going on, a sort of mystery that you're trying to uncover, and this, that, and the other. I had figured out personally all of the mysteries and the different things that weren't given up front. They came off pretty obvious to me, but I still really enjoyed this book. It was a physical read. I would have read it in a single day, but I started it late Saturday night, and then I think I finished it that Sunday morning. And this one, I originally gave it 4 stars, I believe, and knocked it down to 3 stars. It was an enjoyable book. I did like it. I ate it all up, but I didn't think it was amazing. Not entirely my cup of tea, even though I enjoyed it. Then, a little bit out of order probably, I ended up reading or starting the Final Empire of the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. That actually took me quite a long time to finish. Not only is it a very long book with its 544 pages, there's just a lot of describing and things like that. At a few times I got a little bit tired, but it was a library book and I ran out of time, frankly, and it got returned and I had to wait for it to become available again for me to finish. So I ended up giving it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I think it was another one that was 5 stars originally. I actually am partially thinking of knocking it down to 3 stars because even though I enjoyed it, I have no intention really of continuing this series. I'm not very excited about it. I thought it was a good standalone book personally, and like I said, I did have a little bit of a hard time finishing it because I did get a little bit bored. I think it could have been shorter, but I did enjoy it quite a bit. In between that book, I also ended up reading The Last Wish which is part of the Witcher series. It was the first book in this series, and I was really, really excited about that book, and unfortunately I ended up giving it 3 stars. I did enjoy it, but I also really didn't like the way that it was kind of formatted. It felt like it was broken into pieces. I think the part that made me enjoy it the most was that I had seen the first season of the show beforehand, so I was kind of comparing it to the book and the show, and that was kind of fun. I also feel like because I had seen that, I was able to follow along. I do think that some of my dislike for the reading experience was because it was an audiobook. It was kind of like the story was broken up into chunks, and there wasn't a good bridge between chunks. It would just be like, you're here, this happens, and then 5 days later you're in the middle of something else. And I think that's a cool technique, and like I said, it might be more enjoyable if I read it. So I am planning on reading the next one, but on my Kindle, so that I can read it with my eyeballs and hopefully have a better experience. Then next up, I ended up listening to the audiobook for The Shape of Water. I wasn't enjoying it. Like, I don't know, part of me would say I really didn't like it, but there's a point in the book where things shift and I started enjoying it more. Towards the end, I really liked it, to the point where I loved part of it. Like, there's a section that I just absolutely loved. The beginning I didn't like it, and then I got to another point where I was also like, again. So I ended up giving it 3 stars because most of it I didn't really enjoy, and then parts of it I did. I believe around the same time as Final Empire and all of these, I also, because I was trying to read more fantasy, because I am a game master for tabletop role-playing games, specifically Dungeons and Dragons, so I was on a kick trying to just get that high fantasy so I can get some good fantasy descriptions to use when I was running a game. And so I ended up listening to the audiobook for The Awakening. It was part of an Infinity Blade series, another 3-star read for me. Continuing with the fantasy, I then jumped to Song of Blood and Stone, and that book was actually really enjoyable. I loved it because I felt represented with that book. The main character was a woman of color, and it was magical, and it was interesting, and there was kind of a romance to it, and just overall I really enjoyed it. So I ended up giving it 4 stars. It was a good book. I do recommend it. I also ended up getting a graphic novel that I really enjoyed called Grimoire Noir. I'm a really big fan of the artist, as you may or may not know. I am an illustrator, so I tend to be really in the illustration world. I actually don't read a lot of graphic novels, surprisingly, considering I love comics and I love graphic novels, and I would like to do one someday. I no longer have the book, but I did read the physical thing and I really enjoyed it. I ended up giving it 4 stars. All of the rest of the physical books that I have been read at the end of the year, so let's continue going through all of the kind of audiobooks and ebooks that I ended up reading for the year. Another 4 stars that I ended up reading was Every Heart a Doorway, and that was actually a recommendation from Naya Reads and Smiles here on YouTube. One of her favorite series. Let's check it out. It sounds interesting, and I actually really enjoyed it. I don't necessarily think it's a favorite of mine. I did give it 4 stars. I think it was originally 5 stars. I really liked it, and I don't know if I'll continue with the series. I might. It seems like each of the books are kind of standalone-ish, even though they're in the same world. Like, you follow a different kid that had a different doorway, that had a different experience and things like that, which I do find very interesting, and maybe I'll keep picking it up. But right now I enjoyed the first one, and that's kind of where I'm at with that. Then one of my 5 stars that stayed a 5-star was Clap When You Land, which was absolutely amazing. I believe I may have read that at the end of November, the beginning of December, and I loved it. I loved every bit of it. I highly recommend it. I would love to get the hardcover at some point to add to my bookshelf. Just loved it. Then we ended up getting into some romances. I ended up listening to the audiobook for A Prince on Paper. I loved the voice actress for that. I just love listening to her accent, and I loved the steamy bits of it. I just really enjoyed overall how the story went, and I loved the honesty between the characters and the kind of communication that they had. So highly recommend. Great. Lots of steamy bits, but very enjoyable. I ended up giving it 4 stars, originally 5 stars. I also ended up reading Bringing Down the Duke, which I enjoyed. I love romances. It's a guilty pleasure of mine. I tend to be a little bit forgiving when it comes to romances, so I feel like I should mention that because I have a soft spot for them. I ended up giving this also a 5 stars originally. It's a 4 stars now, and I don't know if it deserves that because I don't remember anything that happened. I know I enjoyed it, but less than a month later, I can't remember the premise of the book at all. So don't know what to tell you. It was a romance. I ended up getting the ebook for A Practical Guide to Witches, mostly in the self-care realm for personal rituals that you can do for self-care and self-love and things like that, which is my interest in the world of witchcraft. So like, you know, ritual baths and being more intentional and saying intent with the different things that you do and stuff like that. So that I felt was a pretty modern approach to a lot of that. It did have a lot of detailed like rituals and spells in it that I was a little bit less interested in, but I still found it a good read, and I ended up marking it as 4 stars, and I stand by that. I also listened to the audiobook for Essentialism, which fantastic book. Really, really, really good. I feel like it's has some good points to it. I wish I was better at doing that. I'd like to be more decisive and specific in what I'm doing instead of trying to do everything just focused. So I do think it's a good book. I will probably read it again. 4 stars. I also, now that we are getting into December, I believe, this may have still been end of November, I started listening to the audiobook Becoming by Michelle Obama. It was fantastic because she actually read it herself. She's an excellent storyteller, so it was very engaging. I did feel at some points that it was a little bit long, that I was kind of ready to move on to the next thing. Highly recommend. This is definitely a 5-star. I put it as a 4-star for myself. Part of that is possibly because I'm not one for biographies, so that's on me, but still highly recommend. Amazing. Then I ended up reading, hello editing me, I butchered the title, so the next one was The Murders of Molly Southbourne by Tade Thompson. I devoured this book in a single sitting. I read the physical book and I stayed up pretty late to finish it, and I currently have the second book in the series on my TBR and hope to read that in the near future as well. That was a 5 stars, and I kept it 5 stars. Quick read, interesting, weird. It is weird, I should mention that. It says, for as long as Molly can remember, she's been watching herself die. Whenever she bleeds, another Molly is born. So it says it on the back. That's the big premise, is basically she has to learn how to deal with crazy Mollys that come up every time she bleeds and tries to kill her. So that's the premise. Then I ended up going back and I tried to read Clockwork Angel, which is the first book in the series, and I didn't really like it, and I don't know why. Because when I think back to it and I think to the things that happened, I was like, that's a pretty cool book. That was a good book. I put it as 3 stars. It was enjoyable. I had no intention to really continue it. I think the characters were really cool. Just wasn't enjoying it as much as I feel like I should have. Conceptually, really cool book. And I don't know how to describe it, but it was really popular on BookTube for a while. A lot of people love it. You can probably get some great, more in-depth reviews about it. Then lots of this you will see in my last vlog, and then in the vlog that's coming out on Monday. So you'll get a little bit more about these last books in those vlogs. So I ended up reading The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang. And this book was great. It was a cute romance. I loved it. There were a couple of things that bothered me, but overall, I loved the dynamic. I loved the characters. I loved the romance. There was a lot of steaminess in it because basically our main character is trying to get a man at some point. She doesn't feel confident in bed, so she wants to change that, and she ends up hiring a escort to teach her. Yeah, I didn't read the synopsis for this before I read the book, and I wasn't expecting as much steamy things in here as there was, considering that is the premise. I don't know, it worked out really, really good. I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend. Then right after that, I ended up picking up another book with a BIPOC author, Mary H.K. Choi, and it's The Emergency Contact. Basically, a situation ends up happening where they end up swapping contact information and jokingly say that they're each other emergency contacts, but instead they just kind of build a budding friendship that eventually leads to more desires and stuff like that. I thought it was cute. It was enjoyable. I gave it 4 stars. I had a couple of issues with it, but for the most part, I think it was great and I would recommend. Then I ended up reading Akata Witch, and I have to admit, I didn't really like this. I wanted to like it more than I did. I think it had some really great concepts in it. I thought the magic was really cool. I love the representation. It's another BIPOC author, and then the characters as well are all BIPOC characters. It was beautiful, but it's a middle grade. It was very middle grade. As cool as everything was, the characters were just too young for me to get into, so I kind of feel bad giving it 3 stars because it was a great book, and if they weren't children, I would probably be into it more. It was a great book. I do recommend it if you read and enjoy middle grade. Then, I'm pretty sure it was this one first, but then I ended up reading the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. I listened to the audiobook. I did not have this when I read it. I didn't think I was going to get it, but I enjoyed it so much that I got the physical hard copy. I gave this 4 stars. It's basically about a Southern book club having to deal with vampires, and it's made me very, very angry several times. I think it did an excellent job doing what it intended to. I was annoyed at some of the characters' actions. I was annoyed at some of the things that were going on, some of the things that they went up against. But again, all of that I think was the intention, and it ended up making for a rich experience. It gave me deep feelings, deep emotions. It was an emotional roller coaster. Like for me, this book was lots of very angry, annoyed moments along with some great triumphs and interesting ending. So I enjoyed it, highly recommend. I hear it was suspenseful to some people, possibly scary, thrillerish. I didn't get those vibes at all at any point. I don't know. I didn't think it was scary. I didn't think it was super suspenseful. I found it interesting and I really enjoyed it. There was a part that did get to me, but I think under the circumstances, I was focused on other things more than the fact that I absolutely hated what was happening. So it does have to deal with bugs. So if you've read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, it's not a spoiler. You'll know when you get to it. Other than that, I don't know. It was interesting. It was interesting. Okay, then I think, I don't know if it was before that one or after. I'm guessing at the order all of this stuff is, so I may be off. It's more accurate on Goodreads, but I just kind of grouped everything by my ratings, and that's not exactly how I wanted to go through them. But I ended up listening to A Christmas Carol on Christmas Day, and it was enjoyable. I liked it. I gave it 3 stars. I'll probably listen to it again next year, maybe, but it was nice. There was a nostalgic feeling to it, even though it was my first time actually reading the book, or in this case, listening. I've always seen adaptations or various versions. I actually go to the Dickens Fair in South San Francisco every year, except 2020 because, you know, we couldn't do that, but they have actors playing the cast that walk around the venue, so you get to see the ghost of Christmas past and future and present, like walking around along with Scrooge himself, and it was nice. 3 stars, enjoyed it. So then I ended up ordering The Hating Game, and when I actually opened it, I was not a fan of the quality level of the graphic design, like the art on the cover, and I was like, I'm not gonna want this. So I decided that I would read this first or listen to the audiobook so that I can hold it up here but not actually mess up the book, and then return it. That was my plan. But I listened to the audiobook and I loved it. I ended up giving this a 5 stars. It was a cute romance. There was a enemies to lover trope, which I personally enjoy, and it was enjoyable for me. There was, I don't know, 1 or 2, if it wasn't a romance, it would be problematic things in it that I definitely can call out and say like that was a problem, but yeah, I loved it. It was good. It was fun. I'm gonna keep it. Then the same vein, a book that I've had forever. I actually got it in like the discount section at Barnes and Noble's years ago, and it had a big sticker on it that I really didn't like and was all like, I don't really like this book. I actually think my biggest problem was the sticker more so than the book, because I actually think it's got a simple, straightforward look to it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And it's Disclaimer, a novel that's basically about a woman getting a book sent to her that describes something that happened in her past that was like a secret that she was trying to forget about. You're trying to figure out what the book says. Things happen and issues happen and people find stuff out, and you're trying to figure out, like, lots is going on in this book. At the very beginning, I was like I don't really care. Like, sure, I want to find out like, what's the fuss about this book, because she like freaks out and they don't tell you and you have to wait. And kind of early on, it wasn't that far into the book, you find out what happened, what's in the book. And at that point, my interest in this book as a whole switched to mild interest in finding out what was on the book to actual interest into what was going to happen to the characters. And I'm really glad, because I ended up giving this 5 star. I decided to keep it as a 5 star after I updated my ratings for things because I enjoyed it so much. There was a twist that part of me sort of saw coming, but also didn't at the same time. I saw that kind of vein, that line of whatever. And then there's some things that I sort of have issues with. I go more in depth in it in my Goodreads review, so if you want to know my spoilery thoughts to it, definitely go there. But I enjoyed it. I don't read a ton of thriller mystery type things. This I felt was a little bit more on the mystery side than necessarily the thriller side. I feel like most of this was you trying to discover the secrets and, you know, like what was on the book, what happened in the past, why, like what's going to happen to them. I think there was a little bit of that thriller aspect because you did have this like menacing backstory to the book that was sent to her. Basically, there was a more devious reason for it, but I don't think that stood out to me as much as the mystery aspect. So enjoyed it, really liked it. 5 stars. I decided for the last 3 books of the year that I would just do straight up audiobooks that I didn't like the covers to. Okay, so I wanted to mention that when I say that I didn't like the covers for these, it's not like there's anything wrong with the covers. They were just covers that I didn't necessarily want the physical copies for myself because I didn't love them or anything like that. And I'm trying to give myself an excuse to not spend money that I don't have. So the first one was the Austen Escape, which was a romance. All of the last 3 ones were romances. This one, our main character, you know, a brainy character with a brainy job who had a smart friend who was really into Jane Austen and her works and things like that, and convinces her to go on a trip to this Austen Escape where it's a fancy place in England or something like that, that's at an estate that looks similar to what you would find in a Jane Austen novel. And the people who go there dress up. You get clothes, you get a maid, you get to pick a character and play that part. It was enjoyable. I did like it. I gave it 3 stars. It wasn't a new favorite. End of story. Then I ended up listening to Meet Cute, which seemed like a fun rom-com. There was a mix between rom-com and then heavy-hitting serious topics, and I enjoyed the whole premise and the story and all of that, but I felt like the bridge between the cute rom-com aspect and the serious heavy-hitter side of things wasn't as developed as I would have liked. So I felt like I was reading a book that had 2 separate tones that didn't really mesh as well as they could have or were intended to. That could be just me, I don't know, but for some reason it bothered me. It also bothered me that the cover didn't match the tone or the feel or anything of the book itself, and felt misleading compared to how much of a serious topic there was behind the story itself. I don't know what the synopsis is, and since I don't have the physical book, I can't like read. I don't want to spoil anything for you, but I will say the first part of the book I absolutely hated. Like, hated so much. If it hadn't switched to a different tone and time period, short, like when it did, I probably would have DNF'd the book because I just didn't like it. I really disliked it. And then there was a couple of parts throughout that were like for me, but overall I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it quite a bit, enough that if it was finessed a little bit more, it could have been higher rated for me. So that was 3 stars. And then the last book that I technically finished last night, yesterday, December 31st, was Hero at Law. I had assumed that I had read it before. It was a cover that I was familiar with, but it turned out that I hadn't. It had some parts about it that I didn't really like that much. I did enjoy it a lot, but I ended up giving it 3 stars because the parts that I didn't like were a little bit much. It's the kinds of things that you forgive because it's a romance. So that wraps up my 2020 book wrap up. For the most part, I had a lot of good reads. Most of those 4 stars were originally 5 stars. I thought very highly of a lot of the books as I was reading them or as I finished them. In general, really happy. I'm glad that I managed to get a nice 30 solid rounded number to finish up the year. And yeah, really proud of myself for doing most of that in December. I am hoping to start doing monthly wrap-up videos moving forward on this channel, just so that I find wrap-ups more interesting. I feel like I could have done a better job in this case, but I haven't done this in a while, so do forgive me for being all over the place with my reviews. I will try and be a little bit better in the future. But yeah, I'll try and do those monthly. In my weekly vlogs, I'm going to try and do mini TBRs with, you know, mini reactions and mini wrap-ups for each week. Not as in-depth as the monthly wrap-ups, as that's what the more focused videos will be. But if you're interested in that, definitely subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comment section down below. How many books did you read last year, and or how many books are you hoping to read in 2021? Like I said, I'm trying to read 100 in 2021. I'm thinking 2 to 3 books a week, which I'm really excited about. If you liked this video, do thumbs up. Let me know in the comment section down below, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already and you're interested in things like book-related content, life-related content, art-related content, and witchy-related content. I hope you enjoy, and I will see you in the next video. Until next time, bye!